Hi, I'm Sean McGowan. One of the biggest challenges and rewards of playing solo jazz guitar is improvising over the chord changes of the song that you've arranged. Joe Pass was a masterful solo jazz guitarist, and though not the first to explore this fascinating and challenging art form, his influence on those who would follow him cannot be overstated. Pass got a lot of music and mileage out of the same basic chord shapes that many guitarists are already accustomed to. Part of his genius was his ability to bounce between lead lines, chords, and bass lines, all with effortless sounding fluidity. In this lesson, we'll look at a few of the strategies that Pass used for improvising lines and chordal figures based on common chord shapes. When improvising solo jazz guitar, it is especially important to be able to outline the harmony of a song with your single note lines. We can start to work on improvising through progression by creating lines that are found for the most part within a familiar chord shape, like this common C minor 7 chord voicing. So if I wanted to expand that shape into an arpeggio, it'll sound something like this. And here it is again with all of the notes of the chord scale, which in this case is Dorian. Try to think of these examples as filling out the basic sound of the C minor 7 chord, and take care to notice that each note of the original chord shape is represented. Here's a 2-5-1 progression in B flat major. Note that the 2 chord is the same C minor voicing that we've already looked at. Now let's look at the filled out versions, adding arpeggios and scales, but this time the notes change as the example moves from one chord to the next. One, two, three, and... And the scales? While these exercises don't exactly sound like blistering jazz lines, they do offer a glimpse of how a player can convey shifting harmony within single note lines. Joe Pass was a master at taking collections of notes and turning them into real music with direction, flow, and inventive melodic and rhythmic sensibilities. As we'll see in the next few examples, it's not as difficult as you may think. Here's an improvised line based on the basic arpeggios and chord shapes that we've already covered. 1, 2, 3, and... The line over the F7 sharp 5 chord is essentially the chord arpeggio with the sharp 9 G sharp and flat 9 G flat notes added in for additional color. Here's the example one more time. 1, 2, 3, and... Since guide tones emphasize the thirds and sevenths of each chord, lines that are essentially based on guide tone chord shapes will really project the unique sound of each chord and add a forward motion to your improvised solo. Here's a 2-5-1 progression in the key of E flat, so the chords would be F minor 7, B flat 7 to E flat major 7, and these all use the basic guide tone voicings. Get those shapes under your fingers, and then check out this next example, which adds a solo line. One more time. 3, 4. Learning how to outline chord progressions using single note lines like these is a very important part of learning how to play solo jazz guitar. But it certainly doesn't mean that we no longer have a use for full chord voicings. In fact, alternating between single notes and chord voicings is a great way to make the sound of a chord progression even more stable. Here's a 2-5-1 progression in B flat that alternates solo lines and chords. A 1, 2, 3, and... Here's that example, just a little slower. A 1, 2, 3, and... And here's a similar approach in the key of C, this time using guide tone voicings as a basis. In this example, we've added a few extensions to the basic guide tones to give the chords some flair, including a ninth in the opening D minor 7 chord, as well as a sharp 5, flat 9, and sharp 9 notes sprinkled throughout measure 2 to give the G7 chord an altered flavor. Here's an example. A 1, 2, 3, and... Just a little slower, the same example. A 1, 2, 3, and... Listening to that last example, you may have noticed that the highest note of each chord actually helps contribute to the melody. In these next few examples, we'll use chord inversions to harmonize more notes of our lead lines. Harmonized scales are a great place to get started. Let's take a look at the B-flat major scale. What we're going to do is just play the B-flat major scale from the notes D to D and harmonize it with the inversions of a B-flat major 7th chord. So here's the B-flat major scale. And just playing that scale from D to D would sound like this. So this example is actually harmonizing that scale note with inversions of the B-flat major 7th chord. And here it is. So each chord tone, the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th notes of the scale, is actually harmonized with its own chord inversion, and it's one that features the chord tone as the top note in that voicing, while the non-chord tones are played alone. Some of these chord inversions can be difficult to grab at quicker tempos, so we can substitute other chord forms that are easier to play and still convey the sound of the chord we're currently soloing over. This example is also the B-flat major scale harmonized, but with a few different variations of the chord voicings, a little easier to play. And here's harmonizing a B-flat Dorian scale with B-flat minor 7 chord variations. And finally, here's a B-flat Mixolydian scale harmonized with B-flat dominant 7 chord inversions and variations. So again, these voicings they're not strict inversions, but rather variations on the overall chord sound, but they're much easier to play and they still sound great. Joe Pass would often play these kinds of variations because they really feature colorful extensions and fall neatly within a 4-fret range. When improvising, of course it's not necessary to alternate between chord and non-chord tones as strictly as what we've shown so far in these examples. Feel free to use this technique sparingly and pick and choose which chord tones you want to harmonize with inversions. A 1, 2, 3, and... that same example, slowed down. 1, 2, 3, and... And here's another example. 1, 2, 3, and... And slow down just a little bit. 1, 2, 3, and... You can also feel free to insert rhythmic breaks in between solo lines to create a sort of conversational effect between rhythm and lead parts. 1, 2, 3, and... And here's that same example slowed down just a little bit. 1, 2, 3, and... So as you can hear, this device works really well in a blues type of arrangement. Let's work through a solo that incorporates all of these techniques in the context of a medium tempo swing tune. Miss Jones is in Town is an improvised chord solo etude that features the chord changes to Heavy Met Miss Jones by Rodgers and Hart. This 32-bar etude has 4 distinct 8-bar sections, the first of which blends single note lines with chord breaks to fill out the changes. Measure 4 features melody notes over G minor 7 and C7 guide tone voicings, followed by drop 2 chord voicings in measures 5 and 6. Watch out for the harmonized G-flat major scale in measures 18 through 20, starting on E-flat and harmonized with chord voicings of the progression. The song's final 8-bar section features a lot of chordal movements with large 5-note voicings. These larger chord voicings are sometimes known as block chord voicings, and are really popular with guitarists such as Wes Montgomery, Tal Farlow, and Kenny Burrell. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and... Okay, let's take a look at this etude, Miss Jones is in Town. What we're going to do is tackle each section one at a time with the metronome slowed down. Let's take it at about quarter note equals 100, but I'm going to keep the metronome on beats 2 and 4. So I'm actually going to set it for 50, and that will be half notes. The first A section is an 8-bar section, and this one features single note lines moving back and forth between guide tone voicings and guide tone plus 1 extension on top voicings. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and... Now let's take a look at the next 8 bars. This is the second A section and will take us right to the bridge. This features a lot of the same techniques of single note lines balanced between drop 2 and drop 3 chord voicings and also the guide tone chord voicings. Take it with our metronome again. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and. Now let's take a look at the bridge. This B section is also 8 bars and features single note lines working through actually several inversions of different chord voicings. So we're exploring chord inversions as well as the chord variations that we looked at earlier in the lesson. Here comes the bridge. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and. Okay, and finally we're at the last 8 bar section. This is the last A. And you'll notice throughout all of these examples, there's a lot of syncopation, particularly the use of anticipation. And using these types of rhythmic devices really help propel the time and the forward motion of the song, which is important in a solo guitar context. So you notice in almost every one of these examples, starting with each 8 bar section, it starts on the and of the bar preceding each new bar. Here we go, the last A. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Thanks a lot for joining me for this lesson. For more fingerstyle jazz guitar instruction, be sure to check out the rest of my Fingerstyle Jazz Guitar Essentials lessons available at acousticguitar.com. For Acoustic Guitar, I'm Sean McGowan.